Welcome into a special of Off the Hook Sports. How are you guys doing? This is Caleb Calhoun. Obviously, the breaking news I had to jump on because Nick Saban has retired. Sorry, I'm a little late to this. I wanted to jump on a couple hours ago, but of course, this news breaks while I'm out handling some things. That's been the life of a college football reporter for the past month and a half. You guys got to understand this. This has been brutal for us if we're covering college football because this was the first year with the new December calendar in full swing, and it was just so hectic. And then it goes into the first week of January for the national championship. So you think you get a break, and Nick Saban decides, I think I'm going to steal the headlines now. So for the big news and the big story of the day, Nick Saban has obviously retired. We're going to touch on a lot of this on the show tomorrow live, but I really wanted to give a quick reaction tonight because honestly, the real story to me, the first thing I thought of with Nick Saban retiring was shock, but then it was why now? And this is what I want to get to. Nick Saban retired. This is a bad time to retire if you're a program like Alabama. This is the bad time to lose a head coach. The transfer portal opens 30 days for players after a coach retires. So Nick Saban just gave Alabama an extra 30 days after the recent transfer portal window closed to leave. On top of that, any coach Alabama may want has probably already inked a job elsewhere. I mean, the national championship game was just played. So the coaching is so the coaches have all been inked and hired wherever they want to go. Now it's Alabama. They could probably pretty easy get another head coach. But look, I'm going to talk more about this on the show tomorrow, but there's something suspicious about Nick Saban's decision to retire right now. Now, people say that Nick Saban didn't like NIL. People say that Nick Saban may not like the transfer portal. That's all certainly true, but that's been around for 2 years, and Nick Saban's embraced it to this point, and it's not like that's the first change Nick Saban's ever embraced. He wasn't a big fan of the expansion of the start of the college football playoff, yet he still stayed at Alabama when that happened. He wasn't a big fan of spread offenses. He evolved with that. So Saban is not the type to run when there's a change that he's not liking, and he's not the type to sit there and say this is too much work. This guy is a workaholic. The thing that stands out is Nick Saban. For those who don't remember, we talked about this. Caleb Jarrell, recruiting reporter, this was about a year ago around this time. It's kind of a known thing that Nick Saban did not go home in January of 2023 when he was recruiting for Alabama. I mean, he was on the road the whole time, got another one of their number one classes, and he's got another number one class on the way this year. I mean, the guy hasn't stepped back recruiting at all. So why would you be working that hard recruiting and then make this quick decision? You know what? I'm going to retire now in the middle of, well, not in the middle, but just after the season ends and in January. Something may have happened, guys. There could be something that made Nick Saban decide, I don't want to be a part of this anymore, because it doesn't make sense if you look at how heavily he was recruiting for Alabama last January, which, again, those recruits wouldn't take effect until 2024 or 2025 anyway, and how he's recruiting for Alabama now. That's just kind of a crazy scenario to think about. And I see a couple of posts. Dylan Plowman says Amari Jefferson is picking up his phone, and Dylan Plowman also, you say, I feel like something is fishy. Who knows? Maybe he's annoyed or maybe he's sick. I mean, that's possible. I am going to talk about Amari Jefferson and what this means for Tennessee, but we're going to save that for tomorrow. We have a bunch of articles coming out tonight that you guys are going to want to see because there's a lot to talk about with Nick Saban, including Nick Saban's history. And a lot of his career was springboarded on major games that were related to Tennessee football, including a couple of big upsets at Tennessee's expense when he was at LSU. But again, we'll talk about that later. The big thing is right now, what's behind this retirement? And I'm going to say, I think it's a work-life. I think for many coaches, there's a work-life balance issue, particularly when you hit that 70-year-old mark like Nick Saban has, because it's more of a grind than it ever was. College football coaching was already a grind. It's one of the most demanding jobs out there. Now, I'm not saying it's the most important job. I'm not saying that they're not paid handsomely. I'm not saying that there are, in a country of 330 million people, there are probably 320 million people I have more sympathy for than college football coaches, probably 325 million. And if you're coaching Alabama, 329 million. There's not even a million people in the country right now that have it easier than Nick Saban. But at the same time, there is a work-life balance issue with college football coaches because of the new calendar. When you have NIL, the transfer portal, the early signing period, plus the postseason, and next year it'll be the 12-team playoff, all happening in December. It's a lot of strain on coaches, guys. And Nick Saban, for those who, as anybody is aware, is not like Joe Paterno. Yes, I'm taking a direct shot at Joe Paterno. Joe Paterno sat with his hands underneath him for the last 10 to 15 years as a head coach and let everybody else do the work, and then he just took credit for all the wins. That's not Nick Saban. Nick Saban is very hands-on. I firmly believe that Nick Saban was actually the one who took over the offense this year with Jalen Milroe because he didn't want to do the pro style that, quite honestly, Tommy Rees wanted to do with either Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson. Obviously, Tyler Buckner. I think that was Nick Saban making the calls this year. So Nick Saban's a very hands-on coach all over the place, and I just don't know what I just don't know what's driving this outside of a potential work-life balance issue, which I understand, and I think it's going to drive a lot of coaches out, particularly when they hit that 70 mark, and particularly if you're Nick Saban and you want to spend some of your golden years just enjoying life. But I also say that if he was going to do that, you wouldn't have seen him not come home last January. You wouldn't have seen him in December still going all out on the recruiting trail. Alabama, again, guys, they've been recruiting well. And so it's just kind of crazy to think why he would do this right now. Not crazy to think he would retire. I understand that. It is crazy to wonder why he would right now choose to retire. I want to bring up a few other points. Elias Gray says exactly why there is a near zero chance someone will leave an NFL job for an equivalent college one. Talking about the work-life balance for college coaching. Yeah, it is almost, and I understand they're paid well. I get it. They are paid a lot. But they're no matter what you're paid, there's only so much the human body can handle. Okay. If you pay me, I'm from Memphis, and if you paid me to go jump in the Mississippi River and swim across it in Memphis, you could offer me $100 billion. I wouldn't do it because I wouldn't be able to. My human body cannot physically swim across that river. Okay. So that's just how this works. And I don't care. And it's getting that way with college coaches. But again, the key is what is happening. Why is Nick Saban retiring right now? Because it doesn't make sense for him to retire right now when you consider the fact that he has been on the trail recruiting his butt off dating back to last January after he didn't get into the playoff. And we know this because we know he didn't go home for a while. I have a feeling that has something to do with why Terry forced him to take that vacation in the summer. And he was clearly on a mission to try to win another national title. So to throw his hands up now is just odd. And so Levi says, Levi, I assume you're referring to Tennessee when you say we, because you say, I don't know who the secondary coach is for Alabama, but if we are casually looking for a replacement, there is an option. I will say when we start diving into how this impacts Tennessee, that is an interesting one. Another point, General Nealon, they're hiring Dan Lanning, and he's a recruiting demon. He is. That would be a heck of a hire. I hear that he is the leader to get hired too right now. That would be a very good pickup for Oregon. Again, that also would mean that if anybody could really continue the Saban legacy, it could be Dan Lanning. I mean, you're talking about a Kirby Smart type of coach right up there in the Northwest. And so it's Elias, you give your thoughts again. I think he'd been ruminating on it for weeks, if not the entire season, based on who broke the story. Shout out to Chris Lowe for breaking the story. Chris Lowe getting that scoop. Chris Lowe had been covering Tennessee for a long time. Dylan Elam, Mike Vrabel to Tuscaloosa. Dylan, as Elias pointed out, Mike Vrabel's going to get an NFL job, and as Elias pointed out, no one's leaving an NFL job for a college job right now. Until the NCAA fixes this calendar, it is such a stressful situation to be in. Now, Nick Saban himself is a unique workaholic, but you have to be unique and you have to be built different. And most people are not built like that. Most people are not built to be able to grind like that. So that's an issue for Nick Saban. Most college coaches want to get out of there. I think, honestly, Nick Saban, I do. I think Nick Saban, something happened that made him decide this was no longer the time, and it's something recent because this is not a good time to retire, and he'd been working too hard on the recruiting trail. Greenway says, truth is, he couldn't handle losing to the Vols again this year in Neyland. Well, you know what? I did have him losing to the Vols again this year in Neyland, so that's a very good take. Speaking of talking about Alabama in the future real quick, I want to bring up, because I think a lot of people say this means Alabama's going to fall off, and history shows that, and history does show that programs fall off when they get rid of a legendary head coach. But not always. And if you guys remember, Jimbo Fisher won a national title at Florida State after taking over for Bobby Bowden. And also, Alabama is a type of program where no matter how bad the coach is, they're capable of a top 10 season. Now, Alabama's not Georgia or LSU or Ohio State. I always say those are tier one jobs. When I say tier one jobs, I mean I could hire my dog to coach those three schools and he might win a national championship there because the talent is just so elite. But Alabama's in that second tier. It's like right below there. And so when you're in that tier, you can you can sneak a national championship with a bad head coach, Gene Stallings. You can sneak a few top 10 finishes in an SEC championship with an extremely dumb head coach, Mike DeBose. And so I don't think, and right now they're so loaded with talent, it's hard for me to say that Alabama's just going to fall off, guys. They're still a major threat. So don't sit there and think that they're done because of Nick Saban. And if you want to bring up the dynasty's done, I would agree. But guys, the Alabama dynasty hasn't been there in a few years anyway. Alabama's won one national title in the past 6 years, and it was the COVID year in 2020. So I don't I don't see the drop off from Alabama the way everybody else does. The infrastructure's in place, the talent is loaded. If they make the right head coach, they can just continue this thing, and they'll probably will. For those who think that Dabo, by the way, I've been reading reports that some people thought Dabo Swinney would go. No, because you want to keep the type of coach that still runs a similar system to what Nick Saban is trying to do, one who could keep the transfers. And Dabo Swinney runs more spread elements on his offense in a way that I don't think Alabama would be conducive to. And I don't think Dabo Swinney would want to leave as long as Clemson can get out of the ACC. And again, that Florida State Clemson versus ACC law, or that Florida State versus ACC lawsuit will determine that. I think Clemson is okay long term. And I think right now, it's just less pressure and easier job for Dabo than going to Alabama. Chris Brown, just going to go back to the message board a little bit for some fun, says Nico scared little Nicky. I think Nico's scaring a lot of people. General Leland, maybe they're making him the commissioner of college football. Y'all can hate him all day long. Nick Saban would be an amazing commissioner of college football. I don't agree with all of his ideas, but I actually agree with most of them. So we'll have to see how that goes. Dylan, I could see them hiring internally and trying to preserve the roster for a year or two and then swinging for the fences in the future for a big hire. Yeah, but in the age of the transfer portal, do you preserve the roster if you stay internal? I mean, that's the one thing that is a little tricky. Greenway saying what I said. Yeah, as much as we'd like to see them fall off, they probably won't. Levi says, also adds, seeing Saban as college football commissioner would be great. Elias, how many consecutive 9-3 regular seasons would the successor get? That's a scary proposition. Well, I mean, we can go back to history on this, guys, as a matter of fact, because I do believe that Bill Curry took over for for Bear Bryant. No, I'm sorry. Ray Perkins took over for Bear Bryant in 1983, and he went 8-4, 5-6, 9-2-1, and 10-3. But he did have 3 top 15 finishes in 4 years. And it ain't like Alabama was that good Bear Bryant's last year. I believe they went 8-4 Bear Bryant's last year too. So that's the other difference between Bear Bryant and other coaches who stepped down versus Nick Saban, is that Nick Saban, yeah, he hasn't won national titles, but he's retiring with Alabama winning SEC titles and being number 1 or top 5 consistently. So it is kind of intriguing that he's making this decision now. But Ray Perkins, again, he got a top 10 finish and he finished in the top 15 3 out of 4 years. I do believe Bill Curry, who followed Ray Perkins, he had an SEC championship in 1989. And then you had Gene Stallings, who got a national championship. You had Mike DeBose, who had a top 10 finish in an SEC title. You had Dennis Franchione, who took over Alabama on probation and was banned from a bowl one year. But that year he was banned from a bowl, he still went 10-3 and finished 11 in the coaches poll. So, and then Mike Shula had a 10-2 season. So, guys, we're talking a ring of bad coaches and bad situations for Alabama between Bear Bryant and Nick Saban. And honestly, they were still, all of them, outside of Franchione, who was only there 2 years, every single one of them had at least one top 10 finish. And Mike DeBose and Bill Curry both got SEC championships. So this isn't going anywhere soon. Dylan, you do say nobody wants to follow in Saban's footsteps, in your opinion? Yeah, it's the same with the Pat Summitt thing at Tennessee, but, following in footsteps ain't a big deal with that Alabama contract. I mean, if you hired me right now to go coach Alabama and you threw that money at me, I'm out. I'm going. I don't care if I get fired in 3 years. I know I got a heck of a buyout and a sweet deal. So call it what it is. It's very interesting to see how that goes. But as far as the future for Alabama, Green Wave asking how I have all these facts. I'm a football savant. Yes, I'm going to share somebody who's touting my knowledge, and because Green Wave, I'm going to be honest. When I was in college, I spent half my time doing exhaustive Wikipedia search for the most random stuff, and I just stored it all in my head. And so, and then Elias, let's go full Bill Curry and watch the next Bama coach leave for Kentucky, or could the next Kentucky coach leave for Bama? Mark Stoops, anybody? Um, Now, in terms of the question, is Nick Saban running? Guys, guys, guys. Nick Saban's not running. Okay, he's not running. He went into the SEC when it was loaded. He's leaving the SEC when it was loaded. He cashed in a middle period of the SEC when it was not loaded because they ran off all the good coaches because everybody wanted to compete with Nick Saban. This is not an Urban Meyer situation in 2009. And for those who don't remember that, little bit of history is that in 2009, Florida and Alabama played for the SEC title, with Florida going for its third national title in 4 years, their second straight. Tim Tebow's senior year, Heisman Trophy quarterback, obviously winning quarterback. They were going for their first undefeated season in school history. They were the class of the SEC. Alabama's on the come up with Nick Saban. It's their third year. They lost to Florida the year before. SEC title happens, both undefeated, 1-2, and Alabama beats the brakes off them. And you saw in that moment that the future of the SEC was Nick Saban in Alabama. And as a matter of fact, many people saw it earlier. For those of you who weren't following Tennessee at the time, when Tennessee went to visit Alabama in 2009 when Lane Kiffin was there, Tennessee had already lost to Florida. Lane Kiffin was throwing all these shots at Urban Meyer, which everybody remembers. And Lane Kiffin said in the press conferences leading up to the week, Florida is a great program, but leading up to the week of playing Alabama, he said, we obviously respect what Florida's done, but this Alabama program, that's the model for what we want to do for our program going forward. And everybody thought that was just some petty hatred Lane had to Urban Meyer. No, he knew what was happening with the program at Florida. He knew the program was about to unravel, and it did. And Urban Meyer bolted a year later. He stayed a year too long. That's why he retired and then came back from it, because he knew it looked like he was bolting. Tried to fix the broken pieces. Couldn't without Tebow, and went 8-4 in 2010. And then he bolted. Saban's not bolting. Saban's not bolting. There's something going on. Now, if I could speculate, it's possible that Saban's frustrated that the boosters won't cobble up the same NIL money that other schools would. That's very possible. Alabama has a pretty good NIL collective, I would believe. If you're a rich Alabama fan, you want to throw money at that school. But is it as good as Texas A&M's? Is it as good as Tennessee's? Is it as good as even Georgia's? I mean, could that be why Saban's so frustrated? It's possible. And he thought, why fight this battle if I can't get the support from the boosters that I need? This is all people might think about. General Nealon, he's listening to his wife, not the first guy to give you in to the constant nagging. Terry wants to drink margaritas on the beach. We're gonna show Terry Saban some respect real quick, because for those who don't know, Terry had a hand in helping him pick the right jobs for his career. A lot of Nick Saban's success is his own greatness. You know, I'm gonna do a video on this one day. One of my sports history videos, what made Saban such a great coach. It was his work ethic. It was all those things you say. But as a defensive specialist, he had two great X's and O's things to him. One, he discovered, and Dave can talk to you more about this, but he discovered the pattern matching style of playing defensive back, of using your hips so you could kind of stay with the receiver following their routes, which made him the best defensive backs coach in college football or the NFL. The other was when he worked at, I believe it was West Virginia in the 80s. I think it was West Virginia. He worked for a defensive coordinator at the time who had experience as an offensive coordinator, and kind of showed him how you could work on both sides of the ball, something Brent Venables doesn't know, which made him such an effective head coach who could also run offenses. The other part that made him great was picking the right schools. He picked LSU just as LSU was a sleeping giant with all the high school recruiting there. And that's really what made him a household name. And guys, don't take my word for it. There's a few other people who use words you could take, but Terry was the one who pushed him to keep the LSU job. Terry was the one who looked at the high school recruiting and high school talent in that area. That's what helped propel Nick Saban. So Nick Saban owes a lot to Terry. So because of that, if she forced him to retire, you know what? That's fine. He wouldn't have the career he had without her. Quite honestly, sometimes you got to respect your wife if they support your career the way they did. Yeah, Green Wave. Bama has some money, not quite enough to keep it level. I think that's true. I think Bama's short on on um on NIL money. And Elias goes, think General was right. It's home life balance, recognizing his age, counting the years left, and avoiding the burnout that I already feel like I've seen. And Dylan, Saban's old fashioned. He hates NIL in the portal. He's ready to kick his feet up. See, Dylan, I disagree with the idea that he's resigning on principle of hating the NIL in the portal, because it's not like this is the first time or only time that Nick Saban has had something happen to him, to college football, that he didn't like. He's usually adapted. And if you guys watched First Take the other day, Stephen A. Smith said that, speaking to Nick Saban, apparently Nick Saban said one of his great challenges, one of the things Nick Saban loved, was trying to stay great amidst adapting times. Because Nick Saban's philosophy was anybody can be great in a certain time. Can you be great through different times? And the NIL and the portal, the Nick Saban that was at Alabama for so many years would have embraced the new challenge of winning through NIL and the portal. So that's, I'm not going to, Deca, since I think for that information, I'm going to put it down. I'm not going to repeat that because I don't know for sure. I hope that's not true. It's so it'd be irresponsible for me to say on here, but that is very intriguing if that is true. So people who think, put it this way though, work-life balance, family ties, NIL, none of these things make sense, quite honestly, for Nick Saban. None of them make sense, because if they were all issues, he would have retired a year ago. And there's something else going on here. I'm just going to say that. There's something else I think that's happening. I just don't see how he wakes up one day and makes this decision. And maybe it's a personal issue involving him and his family. You know, we wish everybody the best if that's the case. Maybe it's something as simple as he went to the boosters and he found out this was all the NIL money he could get players. The transfer portal window just closed. Maybe he tried to use some NIL money to get transfer portal players and he couldn't do it. So he got mad and gave the boosters the middle finger. Very possible, and walked out. Maybe he saw some stuff that made him feel like he was just not appreciated enough. Steve Spurrier resigned from Florida because he was tired of the lack of appreciation he was getting there. But it's interesting how this all played out. Please hit that like and subscribe button, turn your notifications on, ring the bell, tell a friend. We're building something great here at Off the Hook Sports. We do want you guys to be a part of it. We're having a lot of fun. Don't forget to tune into our podcast tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. every weekday, Monday through Friday. Obviously, big news of the day, Nick Saban retiring. Curious why it's happened. We're going to touch into a ton of this tomorrow. We're going to touch into how it impacts Tennessee. We're going to touch into how it impacts the SEC. We're going to touch into the recruiting and the transfer portal news and what this does on both of those fronts, and the history of Tennessee and Nick Saban ties. So we're going to talk all about all of that tomorrow. Dave Hooker will be back on then. Thank you guys for jumping on. Thank you guys for being patient with me. I wanted to get this out earlier, but again, some other things were happening. Sugarnaut closes with great show, brother. Thank you, Sugarnaut, and thank you guys all for tuning in and jumping on. This was a lot of fun. I want to be able to do some more things like this going on into the future with breaking news in college football. I've had a blast covering it to this point. I want to have more of a blast covering it in the future, and I do want to say, just on respects, just goodbye to a man who has done so much for the sport, who has been so great in the sport, in Nick Saban. However much you hate him, and trust me, he's fun to hate if you're a Tennessee fan or a fan of any other school. You don't like to see legends. You feel like you lose a part when legends leave. I lost a part of me growing up. I was growing up a Tennessee fan, and I lost a part of me when Steve Spurrier resigned from Florida. I hated him at the time. I love the guy now. He's one of my favorite coaches, probably my favorite of all time. So catch you guys tomorrow. You guys have a great one. Again, with Caleb Calhoun, this has been a special breaking news presentation